Taoiseach, every time a woman is violently attacked, we say never again. Every time a woman is brutally killed, we say never again. Every time a woman is re-traumatised by our legal system, we say never again. And every time an abuser walks free from court with a slap on the wrist, we say never again. But it always happens again. Do those words mean anything to state institutions? Because the women of Ireland have been repeating them for decades. And there is no end in sight. Right now, in tens of thousands of homes all over the country, women are being brutalised. Last week, Women's Aid revealed they had received 40,000 reports of abuse in 2023. That's a 20% increase on 2022 and the highest number in their 50-year history. Because violence against women is an epidemic, and it frequently happens in plain sight. Natasha O'Brien was walking home with her friend. All she was doing is existing in a public space, and Cathal Crotty decided to beat her to a pulp while his friends stood there and watched. As Natasha lay unconscious on the ground and Crotty walked away, he didn't display any remorse. The opposite, in fact. It seemed he felt proud. 2 to put her out, 2 to put her down, 2 to put her out. He bragged on social media. So we can imagine how he felt when he walked free from court last week. And what did Natasha feel? She felt ignored, defeated, and devastated. Because a man's career was deemed more important than women's safety. Taoiseach, how many more times will we say never again? How many more women will have to be attacked? How many more protests will we have to attend? What will it take for women's safety to be prioritised? Natasha O'Brien's courage and eloquence has been inspiring. But why is it she's had to fight so hard to try to get a crumb of justice? Why is it that women have to bare our souls? Why is it that we have to lead public protests before there is any action or before abusers face any consequence? Taoiseach, Natasha and so many other women out there are fed up of hearing never again. They're fed up of hearing platitudes from politicians, and they're fed up of hearing promises of reform. What they want are answers as to why the system keeps failing them and action to stop it from happening again. Taoiseach, I understand and respect the separation of powers, but there are questions here for the Judicial Council. It was set up in 2019 and tasked with issuing sentencing guidelines. 5 years later, and we are still waiting for any guidelines to be issued. So, Taoiseach, my first question is, have you received an explanation for this inordinate delay? And Taoiseach, with so many victims of crime feeling betrayed and failed by the justice system, will you consider establishing an ombudsman for victims of crime, a single statutory agency that is tasked with assisting victims of crime and advocating for them?
Thank you, Deputy. Taoiseach.
Well, I thank Deputy Cairns for quite rightly raising this issue. Thank you for her words in relation to Minister McGrath, who I join with her in congratulating, and Minister Chambers as well. I want you to know, though, we don't just say never again. And never have I uttered those words, because what we need to do is adopt a zero-tolerance approach in Ireland for when violence does occur. Violence and attacks and brutality will happen. It's how our systems respond. It's how our systems are victim-centred. It's how our systems don't let down the victim. It's how our system should never re-traumatise the victim. It's how our system should deal with the perpetrators. That's what has to be our national obsession now, because I share your view. We should absolutely call this out for what it is. It is an epidemic. We live in a country where there's an epidemic. And I must say, even in this place, when you actually try to discuss and raise some of these issues. You get all sorts of labels get attached in relation to wokery and everything else. This is an extraordinarily serious epidemic, and we should all call out every time we see misogyny existing, including in public policy debate, which happens in this chamber and the other chamber on an all too frequent basis, in my view, Cian Corla. I take the point very much about the Women's Aid report and the figures, as we discussed here in this House last week, and we should, and I think we're due to have, and I hope we're going to have a debate, as I agreed to last week, in relation to that report. I would point out, though, while the numbers are extraordinarily stark, part of it is we are encouraging more people to come forward to speak up and speak out, because we know we live in a society where for far too long, behind closed doors, things have remained. And we need a situation where we're always trying to support people in coming forward and seeking that help and seeking that access. But the figures are an extraordinarily stark wake-up call for everybody in every aspect of it. And I do believe, and I'm not going to constantly read out a long list to run down the clock here, but I do believe there's a lot of actions that have been taken, genuinely, that are positive steps forward. The fact that we now have one single statutory agency called CUAN with legal responsibility for the first time in the history of our state, that we passed that legislation through these houses, is not unimportant. The fact that we have now seen more safe houses, in addition to the more traditional model of refuge beds open across the country, is not insignificant. The fact that we've introduced a number of pieces of legislation around stalking, around non-fatal strangulation, that we've reformed things around the family courts, that we've doubled the sentencing in relation to assault causing harm, which is the most frequent crime committed against somebody experiencing domestic or gender-based violence. So we do have a Judicial Council. That Judicial Council is absolutely charged with sentencing guidelines and also with the issue of judicial training. And these are two issues that I know the Minister for Justice is extraordinarily eager to see progress on, as am I. My understanding is that the first set of sentencing guidelines is likely to be in the area of domestic violence, and we will be seeking an update in terms of a timeline for them.
Taoiseach. Now we move to...
Taoiseach, zero tolerance rings about equally hollow as never again in this scenario. I, like a lot of other people, believe that the DPP should review the leniency of this sentence because it wasn't a zero tolerance one. But my fear is that in reviewing it, we'll discover that this sentence isn't unusually lenient at all, that men routinely beat women to a pulp and walk free from court. Taoiseach, Natasha is now known and admired across the country, but she never wanted to be in this position, and she shouldn't be. We're familiar with the names of other women too. Elaine O'Hara, Jenny Poole, Nadine Lott, Aisling Murphy, Bruna Fonseca, Anna Mooney, and so many more. How many Taoiseach have stood there before and spoken about zero tolerance and promised change? And how many more women's names will we learn before any meaningful action is taken? How many more Taoiseach will stand there? Tackling gender-based violence is not easy, but an easy starting point should be victims feeling supported by the justice system. If you could respond to what I asked you in the opening in this reply, that would be really useful. You referenced the sentencing guidelines, but said we have them, we don't have them. Can we find out what the delay is? Can we get clarity on the weight of victim impact statements in terms of sentencing? Because it's difficult to see how this one was weighed in. And we need to know that perpetrators of abuse are not welcome in our defence forces. What are you going to ensure to ensure these things happen?
Deputy Cairns, I'm absolutely furious with what's happened in this country, just to be very clear. And there's nobody in this House more disgusted than anybody else. Nobody. I'm not just a Taoiseach. My father, my son, my husband. Everybody wants to live in a country with zero tolerance, and nobody suggests zero tolerance is some sort of slogan or platitude. Zero tolerance is the cultural change we need to bring about in this country. And it requires every single person in this place, in the judiciary, in the defence forces, in our public services, in our homes, in our schools, working to bring it about. And I'm extremely proud of the work of the Minister for Justice, a minister who has applied herself to this more than any minister that's gone before her. And I've watched how she's done that. And she's not suggesting, and I'm not suggesting, and there's nobody here suggesting, and Natasha certainly isn't suggesting, that we're anywhere near where we need to be as a country. Nowhere near it. But the work is underway. And I'll never, ever, ever regret talking about zero tolerance, because it's only when politicians, including men, start demanding zero tolerance that is actually how we bring about the change. Now, I've told you very clearly that we're going to seek an update in relation to the sentencing guidelines, and that it is urgent that we get them in place. I will share that view, as does the Minister. And in relation to the Defence Forces, I've also very clearly said, on the record of this House, that I think it is utterly unacceptable that I have to stand here as Taoiseach of this country and cannot answer the question, how many people with criminal convictions are in the Defence Forces today? That is not acceptable to me. It's not acceptable to the Government. It shouldn't be acceptable to anyone in this House. And the Chief of Staff will provide the Taoiseach with the report answering that question, because if you're convicted of a criminal offence in the Defence Forces, get out of it.